Okay, let's see if I still know how to do this. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Grumpy Snail Podcast. When the news is made up, my opinion doesn't matter. I'm your host, Jonathan Snyder. Thank you for joining me. Make sure you click that like button, subscribe to my channel, and if you like this video, make sure you share it. And check out the merch link in the description down below. As always, I haven't done a video in probably 2 weeks now. Yeah, it's been 2 weeks since I did the last video, and it's too much to keep up with anymore. Life has gotten in the way. So I will keep doing these videos, but they probably won't be as regular till I get everything situated again and get back to a normal routine. Okay. With that being said, I do have a video for you in the sense of our Great Reset talk. And so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next chapter. In 1910, the U.S. Senator Nelson Aldrich of Rhode Island, the chairman of the National Monetary Committee, instructed several of America's highest profile bankers to covertly meet at night in a train station in New Jersey. Among those who attended were Henry P. Davison, a senior partner at J.P. Morgan and Company, Paul Warburg, who was the founder of the investment firm Kuhn, Loeb and Company, and Frank A. Vanderlip, who was the vice president of National City Bank of New York, which is now, Citibank, and Charles D. Norton, who was the president of Morgan's First National Bank of New York. These wealthy, extremely well-connected men selected by Aldrich, one of the most powerful senators of his day, were told that they must hide their identities, use only first names with each other, and dress as if they were going on a duck hunting expedition. Because late-night duck hunting train rides are not suspicious at all. Really. The bankers were then informed that they would be heading to a lavish resort in Georgia on Jekyll Island, where they would join other important businessmen and policymakers to formulate a plan to reshape America's banking system. Once they arrived at Jekyll Island, hidden under a fog of secrecy, these members of America's economic elite began crafting legislation that would eventually become the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, the law that created the Federal Reserve Banks. Had the Federal Reserve never been created, the 21st century fascism of the Great Reset would be virtually impossible to achieve, because without central banks turning out trillions of new dollars, how could the government elites pay for all their shiny new socialist programs? Perhaps even more important, the events of 1910 teach us that a relatively small group of elites can and do make gargantuan, history-changing alterations to global economic markets, and they can do so without most people really understanding the repercussions of their actions, or even knowing that, they have occurred. Millions of Americans face many problems. Poor education, joblessness, homelessness, a lack of affordable health care, just to name a few. There's no shortage of things that could be better, and the ruling class elites have no shortage of supposed solutions to these problems. Free college, universal basic income, government housing, government-run health care, you name it. The politicians from both political parties want to provide it, and often for free. The confounding question inevitably arises, however, how are you going to pay for it? In the past, policy proposals would be rejected frequently because they were considered too expensive. To fund their pet projects, lawmakers would routinely they would have to search for what congressional insiders would call pay-fors, which often come in the shape of new taxes or increases in existing taxes. One example of this was the fiasco that happened with Vermont's effort to pass a state-level universal health care plan. No effort was made to find a realistic way to fund this program, so it failed. Similar on the national level was the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal proposal, and this monstrous plan included a wish list that included 100% renewable energy, universal health care, a federal jobs guarantee, and college debt cancellation. In this case, even many Democrats ended up rejecting the proposal because of its high expenses. The American Action Forum ran the numbers on the Green New Deal and determined that it could cost upwards of $94 trillion over just 10 years. That's equivalent to cutting a check to every single American to the tune of $280,000, which would be nice. Yeah, I think that would be nice. How about we just do that instead? We have a limited supply of wealth, labor, and time, which makes it valuable. Investopedia, which is a crazy thing to imagine, puts it, quote, economics is the study of how people allocate scarce resources for production, distribution, and consumption, both individually and collectively. Fundamental principles like supply and demand, price signals, and opportunity costs are all anchored to the core concept of scarcity. To advance programs that centralize power in the hands of the ruling class while winning over Main Street Americans, elites need something much stronger than tax increases, but not as overtly authoritarian as gulags. And that answer is, of course, modern monetary theory. MMT, for short. Currently, the face of modern monetary theory is Stephanie Kelton, a professor of public policy and economics at Stony Brook University. In 2015, she served as the chief economist of the Democratic Party's staff on the U.S. Senate Budget Committee. Kelton was also the senior economic advisor to Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020 during his presidential campaigns, and a member of Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders' 2020 Unity Task Force. Additionally, Kelton is the author of The Deficit Myth, Modern Monetary Theory, and The Birth of the People's Economy. According to modern monetary theory theorists, everyone should stop worrying so much about the national debt and deficits, because the U.S. government can print and spend as much money as it wants to in order to achieve the goals set by the federal government's bureaucratic masterminds and political elites. In a 2019 interview with CNBC, Kelton explained this idea more completely, highlighting the distinction between a money user and a money issuer. Modern monetary theory starts, well, this is a quote, modern monetary theory starts with a really simple observation, and that is that the U.S. dollar is a simple public monopoly. In other words, the United States currency comes from the United States government. It can't come from anywhere else, and therefore it can never run out of money. It cannot face a solvency problem, bills coming due that it can't afford to pay. It never has to worry about finding the money in order to be able to spend. It doesn't need to go and raise taxes or borrow money before it is able to spend. So what that means is that the federal government is nothing like a household. In order for households or private businesses to be able to spend, they've got to come up with the money, right? And the federal government doesn't have to behave like a household. In fact, it becomes really destructive for the economy if the government tries to behave like a household. You and I are using the U.S. dollar. States and municipalities, like the state of Kansas or Detroit, they're also using the US dollar. Private businesses are using the dollar. The federal government of the United States is issuing our currency, so we have a different relationship to the currency. That means that in order to spend, the government doesn't have to do what a household or private business has to do. Find the money. The government can simply spend the money into the economy, and when it does, the rest of us end up receiving that spending as a part of our income. End quote. It was a big quote. Now, normally, I think people tend to hear deficit and think it's something that we should strive to eliminate. That we shouldn't be running budget deficits. That they're evidence of fiscal irresponsibility. And the truth is that the deficit can be too big. Evidence of a deficit that's too big would be inflation. Let's say it together. Inflation. But the deficit can also be too small. It can be too small to support demand in the economy, and evidence of a deficit that is too small is unemployment. So deficits can be too big, but they can also be too small. And the right level of the deficit is one that gets you a balanced overall economy, and one that allows you to achieve higher levels of employment and low inflation. That's another quote. In a 2019 article, Barron's writer Matthew Klein compared modern monetary theory to a, quote, peacetime version of wartime economic management. And he suggested that modern monetary theorists believe, quote, governments can do whatever is necessary to satisfy the public purpose as long as they maintain their authority over the populace. So just imagine all the things the government could do if it were not limited by that looming big question, should we cancel all student loan debt? No matter how rich the borrower is? Why not? Debts and deficits don't matter. Should we pass the $94 trillion Green New Deal? Why not? The debt and deficits don't matter. Should we continue to nation build all around the world? Why not? Debts and deficits don't matter. If the government can just print money, why would it need to tax anyone? And also, wouldn't all this massive money printing result in inflation? Under modern monetary theory, instead of being used to raise revenues, to pay for government spending programs, taxes function as tools that help the government manage the economy more closely, and as weapons to punish those businesses and groups that the government doesn't like. According to Kelton, the first reason that government should continue using taxes under the modern monetary theory is that, quote, taxes enable governments to provision themselves without the use of explicit force. Or, in other words, they require people to use dollars instead of other kinds of currencies. Secondly, taxes serve as a form of inflation control. Now, Kelton argues, if the government wants to boost spending on health care or education, it may need to remove some spending power from the rest of us to prevent its more generous outlays from pushing up prices. Under modern monetary theory, the government might need to battle inflation by destroying the wealth of the people, including the middle class and working class. In order to make room for more government spending, of course. I believe the Fed is doing this right now by raising interest rates. Thirdly, taxes can be used for wealth redistribution, Kelton wrote. I quote, modern monetary theory sees taxes as an important means to help redress decades of rising inequality. Professor L. Randall Wray wrote the following response in reaction to questions about how taxes relate to modern monetary theory. Quote, for far too long, left-leaning Democrats have had a close symbiotic relationship with the rich. They've needed the good rich folk like George Soros and Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Bob Rubin, to fund their think tanks and political campaigns. The centrist Clinton wing has repaid the generosity of Wall Street's neoliberals with deregulation that allowed the CEOs to shovel money to themselves, vastly increasing inequality and their own power. And they, in turn, rewarded Hillary, who by her own account accepted whatever money they would throw in her direction. Today's progressives won't fall into that trap. How are you going to pay for it? Through a budget authorization. Uncle Sam can afford it without the help of the rich. And by the way, they're going to tax you anyway because you got too much. Too much income, too much wealth, too much power. What will we do with the tax revenue? Burn it. Uncle Sam doesn't need your money. In reality, taxes just lead to debts. Or taxes just lead to debts to bank accounts. It's debits. Debits to bank accounts. We'll just knock 3 or 5 zeros off the accounts of the rich. Of course, double entry held by the rich, so we'll wipe zeros off student loan debts, the mortgage debts, the auto loan debts, and the credit card debts of American households. Yes, debt cancellations too. Let that sink in. It's an end quote. As Kelton notes that under modern monetary theory, governments can use taxes to encourage or discourage certain behaviors, to improve public health, battle climate change, or deter risky speculation in financial markets. So rather than distinctive government from imposing controls on society, a system utilizing modern monetary theory would empower policymakers to use the tax code to manipulate people, even if they no longer have a financially motivated reason to do so. Are you letting all this sink in? Modern monetary theorists usually cite a couple key arguments against the worry of hyperinflation due to money printing. First, the US dollar is the world reserve currency, which means countries across the globe use and accept the dollar when conducting trade. Second, modern monetary theorists would argue that most of the worst examples of hyperinflation were brought on by very specific circumstances, such as like a civil war, a huge external debts denominated in a foreign currency. And third, modern monetary theorists say there is no reason to worry about hyperinflation because Americans have access to an unstoppable weapon of monetary security, the Congressional Budget Office. At present, elites at the Federal Reserve have essentially one major monetary lever, which is the baseline interest rate. During periods of economic malaise, the Fed lowers the interest rates to an attempt to boost markets by infusing them with cash from lower interest rates loans. When inflation creeps in, the Fed raises interest rates to curb rising prices, just like it is now. Modern monetary theory throws out this lever and replaces it with a gigantic panel full of levers and switches and knobs and twirly things that allow bureaucrats to manage the economy and society as they see fit. Sounds like a great reset. Which is exactly why Stephanie Kelton has asked to speak during the November 2020 World Economic Forum virtual event. She said, quote, "Governments can establish where it is they want to go, and they can provide the kind of large-scale and patient finance that can remain in place for the duration of the time that we are going to be making transformative investments in our economy moving forward." End quote. Now, sure, the dollar being the world's reserve currency might help. But who's to say that it will last? Have you ever heard of BRICS? Many global institutions and government leaders in Europe and Asia have already started floating the idea of shifting the reserve currency to the International Monetary Fund's special drawing rights, which is essentially composed of a basket of different currencies and designed to act as a stable medium of exchange for international trade. If the government and the Federal Reserve continue to pursue a modern monetary theory system, the U.S. dollar will become increasingly vulnerable to losing its world reserve currency status. But that would be better. That would be a better case scenario as opposed to the recommended digital currency. Consider World Economic Forum board member Mark Carney, who is an economist and a banker who previously served as the governor of the Bank of Canada, as well as the governor of the Bank of England. Carney spends his days convincing other elites that the U.S. dollar is too influential in global markets and should be replaced with a digital currency. And he did at the 2019 Economic Policy Symposium at Jackson Hole in Wyoming. Quote, "A digital currency could dampen the domineering influence of the U.S. dollar on global trade," Carney said. "The dollar's influence on global financial conditions could similarly decline if a financial architecture developed around a new digital currency, and it displaced the dollar's dominance in credit markets." But he's not alone. The Chinese Communist Party supporters, Communist Party supports this as well, as CCP. In January 2020, the World Economic Forum announced the creation of the very first global consortium focused on designing a framework for governance of digital currencies. The World Economic Forum founder and executive chairman Klaus Schwab said, quote, "We hope that hosting this consortium will catalyze the conversations necessary to inform a robust framework of governance for global digital currencies." On February 28, 2021, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said exploring the creation of a central bank digital currency is a high priority project for us. Back in 2019, during a Bank of England forum, Christine Lagarde, or whatever these people's names are, who was then the director of the IMF, and who currently serves as the president of the European Central Bank, discussed the idea of developing a digital version of that SDR that we were talking about. That thing I mentioned earlier. You know, this concept was dubbed the IMF coin, and could easily become the world's new reserve currency. A scenario that she said was not a far-fetched hypothetical. The amount of power and control over the world that would come with the full embrace of a modern monetary theory system, especially if mixed with the digital currency, is almost too much to fathom. Not only would government and central banks be able to create as much money as they wanted to, they could, depending on how the new monetary framework operates, literally create and distribute cash with the push of a button. If all currency were to become digitized and physical mediums of exchange were phased out, then banks, financial institutions, and governments would be able to track and control nearly every transaction in the world. In a world with a centralized digital currency, what's to stop the ruling class from putting a limit on the number of Cokes you can buy, or the number of burgers you can eat, or alcoholic beverages that you consume, or cigars that you smoke? I mean, what's to stop them from preventing you from buying any alcohol, cigarettes, or even Twinkies for that matter? They are bad for you, know. What about limits on energy consumption? Maybe you've done your fair share of traveling for the year and are deemed not important for a travel exemption to take another unnecessary vacation for your family. A great reset world that runs on a government-controlled global digital currency could make firearm and ammunition sales impossible. On the next podcast, I will talk more about what the Great Reset actually looks like. But for now, your time is up. But the grumbly ramblings will continue. So make sure that you tune in next time. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, do all the things that I asked at the beginning of this video. Make sure you check out that merch store link in the description down below. And please, definitely come back and watch if you want more information. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good night. Cheers. Godspeed.